what we've seen to be particularly important for some, at least some of them, not everyone. To start with, Michelle, can you tell us just kind of like a broad overview of what a healthy lifestyle, like what, I guess maybe like split up, like what are the different components of a healthy lifestyle so that we can kind of make sense of it, the different things that we should be focusing on?
Yeah. So I think food is, of course, one of the most important things, and it's something that we do 3 times a day. So just the frequency of it brings, heightened importance. Just focusing on whole foods and not hyper processed foods. Sleep is also of great importance, just because it actually helps with everything, but it really relates to the immune system, and blood sugar dysregulation, and also brain health. So, any symptoms like brain fog and these kind of things can be helped by sleeping better. And then there's stress, and we've spoken in a previous webinar. Stress encompasses more than just being stressed out at your job or on the road. It's any kind of stresses that are on your body in the form of environmental toxins, air pollution, maybe skincare products that you're using, maybe toxins in your house like scented candles or air fresheners, or even the mattress that you're sleeping on. There are many aspects to that. And then I would say, those are really, I think if you use stress to encapsulate all of those, I would say that those are the main ones. Maybe if we include drinking water with food. Also just, a lot of people are just drinking caffeinated drinks, basically diuretics, every day, and not hydrating. So that is also something really important. And then movement, of course, but movement in a way that is not high intensity workouts, in the context of long COVID. Because actually many people actually have triggered flare-ups after they exercise. So things like slow walking, certain types of yoga, qigong, like nervous system regulating and soothing movements are also really great. So yeah, I think those are the...
Yeah. So the other ones that the other ones that I like to focus on for people that, again, like often, like last time we spoke about socialization and being part of a community, and that kind of stuff. But two others that I think are really important are just nature, like sun exposure, how healthy that is, and maybe forest bathing and stuff, like these different practices and why they're so important, and just being kind of connected to the natural world. And it also helps you kind of regulate your sleep and a lot of things. Like these are all like you're kind of saying, they're all kind of interconnected. But I think perhaps one of the most important, which really hardly anyone ever talks about, is having meaning and purpose in your life, because it helps you to make sense of all the rest and actually be motivated to do all the other things. So I think that's a place that a lot of people are lacking, right? And if they need to kind of bring some meaning and some purpose into their life in order to drive them to make all the other kind of changes that would help them. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good overview of the main things. And there's literally you could write books on each one, multiple books, right? Encyclopedias on each one, and the importance of different aspects of it, with food, how often you eat, how often you don't eat, how much you eat, what you eat. I mean, it's how you eat, there's so many different things to it. And the same for all of these things. There's a lot to them. So I guess just for you had said for long COVID, some of the things that we find specifically important for long haulers are, like you said, avoiding high intensity exercise and trying to stay to zone 2 exercise or below. And how do you know that you're in zone 2? I mean, there's different kind of formulas for it based on heart rate. But just a more kind of natural or integrated way of knowing is, for example, when you're, for most people, it's walking, right? Anything more strenuous than maybe a kind of a mid-paced walk is going to be outside of zone 2. But the way that you know is that you're able to carry on a normal conversation. You're able to breathe, through your nose without having to like huff and puff through your mouth. And there, I think there's some other indicators, right? But so what do you think about that? Like just maybe the importance of zone 2 in general, right? Like, if you heard of Phil Maffetone, he kind of is also on the zone 2. Like, he talks about how important that is for just cardiovascular fitness. And instead of like trying to like push yourself into like zone 4 or 5, like it's really important to build your like zone 2 base and then slowly like shift it up so that you're able to do more while staying in zone 2.
Yeah, I think this also touches on what we've spoken about in adrenal in previous webinars about the kind of stress or toxic burden on the body, because a lot of people are suffering from many different stresses and many different exposures to stress. So then exercise is actually a stress. And even though we think of it, as a good thing, which it is a stress. And that's, everyone's experienced the feeling of being sore after a workout, because that's your muscles in a way tearing and breaking, and then your body has to rebuild, which is of course good, but it is still a stress in the literal sense on the body. So in with the view in mind of kind of minimizing and reducing stress, the idea of doing something like walking or maybe gentle swimming, qigong, is much more conducive to healing than adding another stressor. You want to be minimizing stress and walking and these kind of things, because they regulate the nervous system in a different way to, say, a HIIT workout or CrossFit. It's you're removing a stress rather than adding a stress. And then, I think a lot of people, they are suffering from some level of adrenal fatigue, even in the case of other chronic illnesses. Maybe their cortisol levels are all over the place. They're drinking coffee in order to wake themselves up and stay awake all day. So in that kind of case, you're in this high stress adrenal fatigue situation. Adding an high intensity workout to that is actually just making things worse. It's just adding more stress. So I think it is really important to focus on that. And that can be, I don't know, some people just really love HIIT workouts and these high intensity things, but they do notice that they get a flare up really soon after that. So
yeah, and for some people, some of the patients I've seen, I mean, the flare up can last like a couple of days. For others, it's like it can last for weeks. I mean, it's like, and so some people have really, made the connection and finally, and sometimes it's that like high intensity workout that actually triggers long COVID to begin with. So like my kind of like understanding, or like the story I tell myself, the paradigm that I see it through, is that, again, your body is probably for like 3, 4, or 5 weeks after the infection working on getting rid of the spike protein, and so this is one of the theories that we have, that it's the spike protein that triggers the inflammation, and the spike protein is within the mast cells, not the mast cells, the macrophages. The atypical macrophages are holding on to it, and they've become long-lived, like they've become unusual, right? An unusual version of themselves. And they are sending out inflammatory cytokines and inflammatory markers, and they're just triggering different avenues of inflammation. Interleukins are being elevated where they shouldn't be. And so your body does naturally get rid of the spike protein, or it should be able to do that. It should be able to clear it out. And part of the process of getting rid of things that you shouldn't have is called autophagy. And that's been spoken about by, Paul Merrick and Dr. Mubin Syed of the FLCCC. And I mean, Paul Merrick even went so far as to say the only way to get rid of the spike protein is a autophagy or autophagy, however you pronounce that word. And so that brings us to one of the other things that a lot of people are seeing. For example, people who have followed Tom Bunker online, he came up with a fasting protocol to help people stimulate autophagy and stimulate their body's ability to clear out the junk. And so people have noticed that intermittent fasting is helpful for long COVID, and up to 80% of the people who just did that, in his protocol, found that their long COVID, dropped, their severity of their symptoms either went away or it dropped by at least 80%. So 80% of the time, 80% improvement or more. And really, I've seen the same kind of 80% numbers with a lot of interventions, right? Like medications and food, restriction of food, and like, so different things oftentimes will have like 80% of the people notice that they help them. So it's important to combine, multiple things together in order to get to the 100%, of people improving, because for some people, one thing might be more important than something else. And so with food, the other thing that we've seen that's important for some people, and again, not everyone, is limiting the histamine in their diets. And so like looking up, which foods have high histamine in them and minimizing those, because for a lot of people, the long COVID kind of pathology is a mast cell disorder, and it's heavily linked to histamine. And a lot of the inflammation is coming from the histamine. Histamine can give you all kinds of symptoms that a lot of people wouldn't expect. So, for example, like a lot of people think of allergic disorders like linked to histamine as just like, you just have a runny nose, but it can give you fatigue, it can give you brain fog, it can give you headaches. I mean, things that people oftentimes don't link to like an allergic condition can often be linked to histamine. Even things like anxiety and like feeling like wound up, and that can also be related to histamine. So those are some like brief things. The other thing I just wanted to kind of like look at and have people consider is, so I guess like, why don't people do what they, I guess, quote unquote, know that they should do, right? So in the traditional medicine world, in the mainstream medical world, doctors know the importance of lifestyle. Okay, it's not like they don't know it, right? And they will sometimes pay lip service to it and tell their patients like, hey, you should, maybe eat less and so that you can lose weight. Or, like when somebody comes to you with a new diagnosis of hypertension, like the correct like approach from the like in the mainstream medical textbooks is like, give them 6 months of lifestyle change, right? Before you try to add medications. Like give them a chance, because we know how easy it is to change blood pressure if you change your lifestyle. If you start exercising more, your blood pressure will likely go down. If you do some stress management stuff, your blood pressure will likely go down. I think too much attention is paid to salt. I don't think it doesn't actually make much of a difference for the vast majority of people. There's like a small percentage of people who are very sensitive to salt intake, but for the majority of people in the population, it's like if you severely limit your salt intake, your quality of life kind of suffers, and the palatability of your food goes down, and maybe you lose some weight because of that, but usually not. But it only makes like a few points difference in your blood pressure. It's like maybe you go from like 160 to 156. It's like it's not enough to really move the needle. But I'd like to ask you about that too. What you think about that? Yeah. That one little thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think. Well, the interesting thing about minerals is that they're usually paired. So sodium and potassium, usually, and then, so I think, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think sodium and potassium, they regulate osmotic pressure in the cell, right? So they have this dialogue to regulate the pressure. And I think that the issue is that in a lot of hyper-processed food, there's loads of sodium and no potassium. So you're getting this kind of asymmetry of those. And then people demonize sodium because they're like, oh, it's really bad. But actually, if you had sodium-rich foods that also contain potassium, which in whole foods or in a meal, like in a normal just cooked meal that you would do, that's not hyper-processed, it would contain those balance. And then when they're paired properly, they're able to regulate. And when they're taken in isolation, that's when we really have the issue. And I think it's the thing, we spoke about this before with the fat and the cholesterol. It's like, oh, high cholesterol, fat is bad. Okay, remove fat. It's like, oh, salt, hypertension, let's just get rid of it. And it's just not the solution. It's just because we're not seeing it from this holistic level. So I think that is important. And as you said, I mean, food does not taste good without salt. And right, it's just...
I remember one of the cardiologists in my residency program, he like kind of went against the grain with the salt thing. And he was like, people like 1,000 years ago, they used to salt their meat to an incredible degree, right? Like to preserve it, right?
I think salt was a currency at one point.
Yes.
Because it's so valued.
There's salt licks for a reason, right? Even the animals know how important it is.
Yeah.
So I think, I think that is an important point, and I'm glad you made that point about like you have to have this balance. It's like the same with vitamin D. Like you can overdo vitamin D because in nature it comes with vitamin A. Like in liver, there's a lot of vitamin A, and Chris Masterjohn, he's a nutritionist who's written something about this, a lot about vitamin D metabolism, has made the point that like you really don't get vitamin D toxicity when you take the right amount of vitamin A with it, and they're balanced in natural sources. You find like a balance of them, and it's like perfectly balanced for your own body, obviously, right? Like the physiology of humans is not that far off from the physiology of other mammals. So when you find like it balanced in the liver of a cow or a goat or something, it's similar to the balance that you need in your own body. So getting things from natural sources helps to balance their effects. I think that's important. But like to get back to the kind of the thing that I was running on about before we diverted into the salt topic, like why is it so hard to make lifestyle change, and how do you make that easier? And so like I was saying that like physicians, they know the importance of lifestyle change. They know, for example, that like 60-70% of most chronic diseases that kill people are 60 to 70% of those chronic diseases are attributable to lifestyle. So like 60 to 70% of the incidence of like heart disease and diabetes. And I would say it's probably far more. I would say it's like 99%, but at least mainstream medicine admits that at least 60, 2/3 of the major killers in society, like strokes, heart attacks, cancers, are due to lifestyle factors. Okay, so like cancer, right? Like smoking, for example, alcohol use, stress, whatever, right? Toxins, high blood pressure, strokes, heart attacks, diabetes, all these things, right? Linked to like things that we know we can change. And so it goes both ways, right? Like if they are the cause, they can also be part of the solution. And yet, physicians are so kind of like wound up in this like paradigm of just like test and treat, and it's like a two-way street. I mean, the patients themselves are like, physicians have this experience that I tell like 100 people, come to me with a new diagnosis of high blood pressure, that like, hey, let's, try to exercise a little bit and try to relax and try to, sleep better and, try to eat a little bit differently, maybe a DASH diet or a Mediterranean diet or something, and less, refined carbohydrates. And 1 out of 100 will take you seriously and sit there and be like, you know what, I would like to try that, right? So what's missing in the other 99 people that we could perhaps like help them with, right? And so like, I think the people who are watching are interested already. So they are already probably in the 1%, but even that 1%, it's like, how do you help them get to the point? And I think that the answer, as with a lot of things, comes down to education. And so, what I've experienced from people is that like when I tried to institute lifestyle change in a population, what I saw work really well for the most people was like you had to combine a number of things together. You had to gain their trust, and one way to do that would be like giving them a gift or something. So, for example, I was living in Jordan for a while, and this elder in the community, he was like a trusted elder, as kind of a spiritual advisor, and he got interested in the lifestyle change that I had learned about, and another friend of mine who was an Ayurvedic practitioner had learned about. And so he tried some of these dietary changes and things that we were recommending, and he found like tremendous benefit for himself. And then he wanted to like go and tell everyone, right, that he knew. And so like, I mean, he and that's like a traditional culture where he has like a gigantic family of like 1,000 people or something himself, right? And but then he also knows a lot of other people who also have their own kind of communities. And so he took me and this friend of mine and like we did like a tour of the country for like 6 months. I mean, like we just went here and then we went there and then we went there, and we would go and sit with people, and there were like different aspects to it that I realized like later when I was looking back on it. One part of it was that like people, like we would go and sit with them, and you had to sit with them for like an hour or two, right? Like to really convince them, right? And so what I thought was like, you had to like, first of all, educate them, but they also had to hear it from more than one source, right? Like it wasn't just like the MD, right, who has like a certificate on the wall and like people like value that perspective, but it was also like, okay, this guy is an Ayurvedic practitioner, he's from a different part of the world, and this other person's like an elder from your own community that you kind of trust because of that. And so like they had to hear it from like these three different perspectives, right? And that really helped to like drive home the message. And the other thing was like we would oftentimes give them a gift or something, which also kind of like gets them, primed to accept something from you, right? Else, like an ask, like we ask you to like change your lifestyle for us, right? Like because we care about you. And they were kind of primed to do that also partly because of the gift. And what would the gift, like it wouldn't be like something huge, right? Like it might be sometimes like maybe like my friend would spend like $50 and like give somebody a juicer, and because he was like really big on juicing, he was like, you got to do some juicing, right, to increase the amount of nutrients that you're like, our food supply has become like watered down kind of, right? Like it's not as high in nutrition as it used to be. The soil's been depleted. So in order to kind of counteract that, he was big on like this juicing thing, which you can argue about, I mean, it's certainly not natural, and you're like, no one's ever eaten like in the past, like 10 pounds of cabbage, right? Like, that you can get in a juice. But regardless, it would be that, or it might be like a little bag of like sorghum, like flour or something, or something else like that, right? Like we would be like, hey, like you should try to like stop eating this modern wheat that is highly inflammatory, and that's a whole topic of its own, and is full of like glyphosate or whatever, the pesticides, right? And maybe try this other thing that doesn't have a lot of pesticides in it, and try to, and so like here's a little like, sample, and go ahead and try to make some bread out of this. It's easy, and sometimes he would actually like make the bread for them right there. Right? He would be like, this is how you make bread out of this other flour that you've never used before. Or sometimes you would invite them back to, our place and be like, here's a meal, made out of this stuff that we're recommending you eat. Like, here, look, it's actually tasty. It's actually like, delicious. We can kind of recreate the dishes that you usually eat with these other, forms of, these other grains that may be more healthful. So those were the kind of things that I look back on and kind of realized in retrospect were important. And why I thought they were important was because of the, like, how effective it was at convincing people to take on this like oftentimes drastic lifestyle change. Whereas when I'm sitting like in America and talking to somebody on like a video or even in an office and like trying to convince them to make a change in their lifestyle, it's extremely difficult. But like this was like, we had like 100% batting average almost, right? It was like literally every single person that we told to do this in that way went ahead and did it. And then since it was so like drastic, like it was oftentimes a total overhaul of what you're eating, right? It was like, get rid of the staple foods that you're eating and replace them with these other foods, and like get rid of the, the vegetable oils and replace them with, olive oil, and like completely get rid of all the junk food, get rid of all the, McDonald's, get rid of all the packaged foods. It was, things that people struggle with oftentimes in America, right, to do. But, when people do them, they notice tremendous benefits. So I, time and again, would see people come to me, or like in that situation, in that environment, like we would go to them and they would have like, like this arthritis that had been going on for like decades, right? Or like heart disease that had been developing to the point where somebody needed like a cardiac cath and like a stent put in. And so like time and again, like within weeks, their symptoms would like start to like disappear, and they would come off of their medications that they've been on for decades. I mean, it was like completely amazing to me, right? I'd never seen anything like this before. Like, again, I kind of like intellectually knew, but like I had never experienced it happening in front of me, and then like over and over again, right? Like a batting average that's like so high that you're like, this is impossible. How is this possible, right? So I saw the proof, right, myself with my own eyes. And so the other key ingredient, I think, was like, the person who's telling you to do it has to be like fully convinced themselves, right? So like a lot of times you go to these doctors and it's like the person's like overweight and they're smoking and they're drinking too much and they're stressed out and they're telling you not to do that stuff, right? It's like, it's a bit hypocritical, and it's hard to convince the person. It's hard to convince somebody when you're not yourself convinced, right? Enough to actually do that yourself. So you got to like walk the walk as well as talk the talk, and then have like multiple sources. So what I'm leading up to this with is like, how do you recreate that for yourself? And I think the answer is that you got to like go and like find ways to learn more about these things in more detail. And like, you don't have to learn it overnight, but like, you might want to read like a book on, diet, like a certain book, or like on breathing, for example, right? There's a great book by James Nestor on breathing, or like a book on sleep, or you might want to take a course on some of these things, or you might, and it's not like just one like book will do it, right? Like that's not enough. You got to like read maybe a book, and maybe take a course, and maybe read, listen to some podcasts, and maybe read some like, blogs. And so like, if you expose yourself to enough, different like, sources of information for these things, over time, you kind of like convince yourself, you yourself become convinced. And then you can be like, okay, what is the next step now? Right? Like, now how do I like get over like the hump of actually starting? But I think the first step is education. So what do you think about that as kind of like a first step for people, just knowing, right? Mm-hmm. Like a lot of people don't even know what they're doing wrong, right? You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. I think there's also, one thing I've noticed in people in North America and Northern Europe is that people are also really overwhelmed with how much information there is out there in terms of health. And a lot of people have actually tried loads of different things with, not succeeded. And they've generally heard of every kind of fad or trend that's been going around, and they're just a bit skeptical and a bit disheartened. And I mean, there's many ways to kind of approach this, and it kind of depends how far along on this path you are. As you said, if you're just beginning, just reading or getting into anything that sparks your interest is a good way of starting, because you're going to be motivated if you're naturally interested in something. So don't kind of, if breath work seems interesting, go into that. If the food is interesting, go into that. But another thing I've kind of noticed lately in the health food sphere is that there are people who are quite extreme with how they are, and whether they're an influencer or a doctor or someone in the pro-metabolic community. And people think, oh, this person's really extreme, I don't want to be like this, so I'm going to dismiss all of their ideas. And I think that's a mistake, because I think that there are these people that are just health fanatics, like Ben Greenfield. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but it's just, every day they're doing like the adaptogenic this, and then they're doing like the sauna, the infrared sauna, and then they're doing like some 7 different nootropics, and then they're doing like cryotherapy, and then and people look at that and they just think, that's never going to be my life, therefore I'm just going to dismiss this entire paradigm. And that's not the way to look at it. I think the way to approach it is think, okay, this person is hyper interested in these things. If I just take one of those things, then that's going to help me. And approaching it through this lens of curiosity, rather than, oh, I need to do all of this to be this person, and that's impossible, so never mind. Like, that's not the mindset to approach it. It's curiosity, and it's whatever sparks your interest, and whatever small step or small change you're going to make is going to make a difference. And then that's going to lead to other things, and then that's going to compound over time. So
yeah, totally. I have 2 things that brought up for me. So one is that kind of getting back to like meeting somebody who's really convinced in order to yourself become convinced. What I've experienced with traditional healers, one is this friend of mine who's an Ayurvedic practitioner, but even like in the Indian subcontinent, like, they have these hakims, and the word hakim means like a wise person, right? So that's what they call their healers, or their traditional healers. And so I went to a hakim once, and it was a completely different interaction than the interaction you have in like modern medicine, so what was so different about it that I thought was important was that he like conveyed this certainty in being able to help me, right? He was like, I can certainly fix this, right? I have no doubt, right? Like, and the way he put it was like, I've seen 5,000 people who have what you have, and I fix them, right? So I'm sure, like, and then he was like, if you do this for 3 months, you'll be better, right? That's what you take this and you do this and you take these three things. You do it for 3 months and you'll be fine. And he was so like matter of fact and just like completely like, this was like the thing he was giving me was this like certainty, where it's like a lot of people, like you're saying, it's like I've seen a million things and I've tried this and I've tried that, but like oftentimes you haven't like combined things and done them long enough to really see the benefit of it. um but like you have to like be certain enough in the thing to be like willing to do it long enough, right, for it to change. So that's one thing, where you're kind of like taking a program of like, okay, I'm going to do this and this and this and put them together. And if you can find somebody who can like tell you that, like, you know what, if you combine these few things together, you'll see a humongous change in your health. So that's kind of one aspect of it. But the other aspect I think that you were getting to is like, this seems overwhelming, it seems impossible. And like from that point of view, like just taking, like you were saying, like take one little change, but like you realize like you're on a journey towards a destination, right? Like just because like the first baby step isn't going to get you to the destination doesn't mean that if you combine a bunch of baby steps together, you like eventually you'll get there, right? And oftentimes the person who, like the story of the tortoise and the hare, right, like the one that like is racing along doesn't actually make it to the end or the finish line first, or maybe never, right? You might just give up if you're going too fast. So I think people also need to just like have some patience with themselves and some, just like give yourself a break, and don't be so hard on yourself, right? So like take yourself, like whatever you're capable of doing, cut that in half even, right? Like make it really easy on yourself, do a little change, but then just in the back of your mind, that like little change are going to build up. And eventually like these people that you see online who are like seem to be extreme, it's not extreme for them, right? But they didn't get there overnight, right? They got there over like 20 years, right? They themselves made little changes that like gradually built up, and they felt like how great it was to live in a different way, and then they made some more changes, and so like they got to where they were slowly. And I'm not saying that they're all living in a a truly healthy lifestyle. I mean, some of them may be doing things that are a little bit too extreme, but just like seeing, okay, this person is like eating totally different from me, and he's sleeping different from me, and he's exercising different from me, and he's like making time to get out in the sun, he's making time to like go and meet people, and like all this stuff seems overwhelming, right? Like that is part of a healthy lifestyle. If you look at it all at once, like imagining like suddenly changing everything is like, it's impossible outside of like going for like 30 days to like a med spa or something, right, where they like force you to do all that stuff. But I guess I would say that like you just have to like look at it, that it is possible to get to a point where your whole life looks different, and it's not hard for you to do that, right? So I think like I hope to be able to inspire people to like someday get to the point where they've made enough changes that their whole health shifts, and they suddenly feel way better, right? Or maybe they gradually feel a lot better, and that is possible for anyone to do if you split up the changes, and make them small enough that there's no, like, it's not a weight on your shoulders to continue doing this little thing, right? So like you walk a little tiny bit more every day, and you just say, I'm just going to keep it up. And then once it like disappears from your conscious awareness, like you don't have to make a decision to walk a little bit more every day. Once it's gone from your consciousness and it's just like a habit, you can add another small habit, right? And then eventually, or you can start walking a little bit more than that, right? Like you start off walking just a tiny bit more, and then you walk a tiny bit more than that. And eventually, like you find a way to build it, work it into your lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is the thing that I always describe as the difference between intellectualizing an idea and embodying an idea. When it's just something that's integrated into your life, and you don't think about it anymore, then that's when you, as you said, you're ready to kind of take another step. So
I guess like the last thing I guess I would want to kind of talk about is like, well, what is your concept of or your approach to motivating somebody that you're coaching, for example, right? Like, how do you approach doing that?
Yeah, I mean, this is also what I was going to say in regards to what part of the formula that you spoke about on, how to get people on the journey. I think when you're in the doctor's office and they say, you need to make lifestyle changes, it's just so broad and so abstract. And having someone to, say, so take, for example, let's decide that we're going to stop having gluten as one example. So then it's even that is overwhelming because, it's like, okay, spelt, does that have gluten? What about sorghum? What about millet? What about farro? What about quinoa? Wait, does that, like that couscous? Okay, these are all, what are they, first of all? And then, and deciding which one has which. And then after that, it's like, okay, so I have toast for breakfast. So can I switch it with this gluten-free bread that actually has like 7 thickeners and xanthan gum and something really, odd ingredients? Maybe that's not the best. So then there's this dialogue of, okay, well, the best thing might be having an omelet with avocado, but you really, really need bread. So let's find a gluten-free bread brand that's good and just made with, say, sorghum and millets or something like that. Maybe it's a bit more low glycemic, and then we reach a happy medium with that. And maybe it might just be that you can handle changing your bread for that one other bread that's gluten-free, and then lunch and dinner you're still going to have your sandwich and your pasta and whatever, because it's too much to even get into that. And then someone else might be like, okay, I'm done gluten-free from tomorrow, everything's changing, I'm having omelets, I'm going for the roast veggies and chicken. And it's just about gauging, not judging, and just gauging where you are and being honest with yourself about how many changes you can make and just continuing on that. And I think having someone to kind of do that with is what helps, versus just being told that that's what you need to do in this very abstract way and not even knowing how to start.
Totally. I think this gets to something that I think we've discussed before in a different place, about, like, in order to really fix what's going wrong in the world, we need like a people solution, right? It's not going to be like a software solution or like an AI solution or like a robotic solution or like a technology solution, right? Like, people need other people, so like, to really like change and shift a population's health, you need like it's like it takes a village to raise a child. It takes like a whole network of like people to help people get better, right? To help people grow in a different direction. And so like the models that work best are where you have a number of different support systems. Like, you don't just have a doctor who's on board, but you have a nutritionist or a health coach or a dietitian. You have a couple of different points of contact, and you like touch base with them once in a while, and you kind of like, you have a team right on your side. And it also helps to kind of get buy-in from your family and your friends, or find, eventually sometimes you might drift towards like a different tribe of people to connect with who are also on the same kind of journey, and that makes it easier. But we have to like, I think like people nowadays, we're oftentimes like seduced by this, like, okay, there's a tech solution, right? Like, I can download an app for this on my phone that's going to do it for me, right? It's gonna, and sometimes it does kind of help, right? Like, so I did see like people, get like a fitness watch and like start, like once they start measuring and tracking something, like it does help them to change it. And that is one of kind of like the ways of helping yourself. For example, like eat less or like lose weight. Like one of the simplest things you can do is just write down what you eat, right? Like every day, just looking at it and like noticing it changes, your, what you do with it, right? And how much you do. And you're like, whoa, I ate that much, right? Like, and so it doesn't require willpower. It just requires writing it down, right? And then like it automatically changes. So like, this is like a concept in the management world that like what is measured will improve, right? Like simply the act of measuring something will lead to improvement. And so I think that that's important, but just like, I think it's important for people to look for like human solutions, right? Like solutions that involve human beings are far more powerful than solutions that are only involve like software or technology or something. What do you think?
Yeah, I think software and technology is great for almost for supporting that education piece, because as you said, you can learn, okay, I had this much protein, I had this many steps, like great, I'm more educated, I have more data points. But then when it comes to actually implementing change, that it's not just that that's going to do it, right? It's like, okay, the person knows that they have this many carbs in the form of gluten, whether it's pasta or whatever. But what's going to help you change is not that data point. It's like, okay, so what can I switch it with? Okay, but I can't do lunch and dinner. So what can I do? Should I just do nothing? Okay, well, this brand isn't good. Okay, so what can I have it with? You know, there's this dialogue, or it's like, oh, I realize I'm using gluten as an escape because I'm actually, you know, like I just, every time I am emotionally stressed or have a bad day, I eat pizza. Okay, so why, you know, let's work on that. Like, okay, you're stressed. There's, you know, why are you using food as an escape? How can you not do that? Okay, you know, it's this multifaceted thing that technology doesn't have a solution for. It's just this one data point that you can leverage, but then you have, you, as you said, you need a person for this more holistic, multifaceted view that is actually going to support that change.
Okay, so I think it's even more than that, right? Like I think it's more of like a, because that you could imagine, right? Like, it doesn't exist yet, but you could imagine like artificial intelligence like being created. Like I think I sent you this link that there's like a AI like counselor now, right? That like has been kind of
Oh yeah.
trained by real counselors, and it, you kind of like interact with it online, but like there's no like human connection there, right? You're like interacting with an app that's telling you what to do and making suggestions. And so like when you're interacting with human beings, there's like a support system and like an emotional connection. And like even in the real world, there's like pheromones and stuff that help you like, you know, connect with people on a deeper level and like just feel this feeling of connection, right? Like it's part of the whole socialization thing, like part of this ancestral health. Like it's one of the things that actually makes you healthier itself. But I think it also, like having a community or a support group or like a tribe or something, right? Like it will help you be able to like sustain the change long term. So I think one of the things we need to like aim for as a culture and just as like individuals who are trying to get healthy is creating like this like dynamic like support system that's like built into our lives, right? Like we had this discussion of like, you know, how do you design a life or like a city or like a society in a way that it's like um purpose built for healthy living, right? So like places like the blue zones, right, that are famous, like Ikaria and Okinawa and different places, and sometimes just like different cultures in the same place. But like, so what is the one in California? It's the
The
Seventh Day
Seventh Day
Adventists.
Adventists. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so they're just like they have their own like microcosm of a culture in the middle of this like larger society, which is not a blue zone, right? So it's really the choices that they're making, and I think they are probably one of the best examples of how can you change what you're doing in a wider culture that's like very unhealthy to begin, in a wider like society and environment that's really unhealthy. And it's not so much about like I have to move to like this Greek island where everyone is just like healthy, right, for whatever reason, but I could actually do it in California, right? I can actually do it in La Jolla, is it where they are?
Yeah, I think so. I
um
no, okay, go. No,
Go
go.
ahead.
Are you
Yeah, you
done?
go.
Okay. I was just I was just actually talking about this in relation to COVID, because you know when we spoke about COVID, it was, you know, isolating, everyone's away from friends, and there's no longer this work culture and office culture. But one positive thing that I saw from it was that you can start to find communities that are not related to your work and related to your actual interests. So I would always say this to friends, because I've been working remotely now for pretty much ever. So for me, the idea of finding friends at work is actually bizarre. Like that's just not something I've ever done. It's through dance, it's through movement practices, it's through surfing, it's through like just mutual interests that usually involve movement and the outdoors. So if you can connect with people through things that you're interested in, and or even want to be interested in, right? Like you, okay, I want to make more friends who are not just into partying on the weekend and into other stuff. It's a great way to build community and an opportunity to do that. Whereas I think people relied a lot on work culture, which in many places can be quite unhealthy, because it just revolves around drinking after work, or you may maybe have nothing in common actually, but you just become normalized or comfortable with these people and you kind of just stick with them, but they actually share no resonance with your life, your broader life, or your more broader goals. So I think in some sense it's been interesting for people to, obviously there's the growing pain because you just have to make these conscious steps to actually build, but for some people I've observed it's actually led to, you know, more nourishment in their community.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think it's important for adults, especially, right? With like adulting or learning how to be an adult.
Yeah.
That like when we were kids, it was like so easy to make friends. I mean, there were just like a million people that you were constantly thrown together with, right? At school or, you know, after school activities or just in your neighborhood or whatever, right? You go outside and play. I mean, at least before the age of like video games when they took over our lives and social media. But yeah, so yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like you got to go and like maybe like join clubs or like join like activity groups or something where you like meet people, right? And especially older adults who have become kind of isolated, they have to make a little bit of effort to like go to like, you know, where other adults are of their age, right? And where they can go and meet people and do something with them, right? Like join a club or a reading club or like a bingo thing or whatever it is. Just go and find people that have an interest like similar to what your interest is, and you know, and just join them and just be with other people.
Well, one aspect of it I think that, you know, relates to what we spoke about with over focusing on work, and you have a very narrow skill set, that I've noticed that also really limits your community, because a lot of times people invite people over around food, right? So if you can't cook, it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to invite people to my house for dinner because I can't cook. Or, you know, another thing is because people are not so committed to activities, they don't become like very proficient at something. So I remember when I started this specific dance practice that I did, I would go in New York City and no one would want to dance with me because I was really bad. And I would just kind of go and watch for hours. I was just so hooked on this thing. I would stay there for 5 hours, you know, and just watch it. And I would maybe dance for 5 minutes, and then everyone would notice I was bad, so no one would want to dance with me. And it's just like persevering and persevering. And now I've been doing this dance practice for maybe 7 years. So any city I go to, I'll go to this specific dance and I'll immediately make friends and I'll be accepted in it because I have this level of skill in this dance practice that is like an unspoken acceptance, right? So then people will want to invite you for dinner or for after going to the dance, or, oh, I'm doing this other thing, would you like to be involved? And yeah, and I do feel like what I notice in young people these days is this kind of freneticism of switching from thing to thing, like, and they do this for 1 week, or they do this on Mondays only, but then don't go again for 2 months, and then they do this. And I think that kind of switching around and never really developing a skill in one area can also prevent you from really deepening with one community and then being able to go to other places and be part of those communities that do that thing. So
yeah, I think the other reason that's important is that, like, I think at least myself, I've had this experience and I've seen other people, you know, have it, that like you invite, you know, these people over for dinner and you like have not much to talk about. It's like, you know, what do we talk about? Or especially like with family, sometimes it's just like people sit around the dinner table and just eat and don't say a single thing. So like being part of like a specific community gives you something to talk about too, right? It's like that's your common interest, and at least there's like a starting point for conversation, if nothing else, you know. But I mean, it often branches off into other things, but it's because like you can branch off in so many different directions from like dance. Like there's so many different other things connected to it, right, that are related to it, right? But like just having this common interest helps you have a conversation with people, and just like create that connection, right? Like it's no longer artificial where you're like trying to like force a connection, right? Like it's like you know, the connection is just like natural.
This is reminding me of a friend who told me he went on a date with someone he met online, and they just met and neither of them said anything and they just left because they didn't know what to say, because because meeting someone online is artificial, right? And then you don't speak beforehand. Maybe they didn't speak, I'm not sure. And then they were both so awkward and just didn't know how to bridge anything, that they just kind of stared at each other and then left, So
yeah. I had this experience growing up too, right? Where like you, as like a child, you would develop like an infatuation with somebody, right? Like you were like a crush on somebody that you had never met, right? And then like you finally meet them, and it's like I have nothing to talk about, and I'm actually, you're not actually that interesting, right?
Yeah.
But like you would develop this whole like perception of who this person was, kind of, right? Like this this idea, you would like build up this story about why I love this person so much, until you finally meet them and they're like totally different than what you thought. Like a totally different person who doesn't connect with you at all. Yeah, so yeah, this is great stuff. Again, we got to wrap it up. And I mean, there's other things that I'd love to talk about, but we'll have to save it for next time. Again, thanks everyone for watching, and thanks Michelle for co-hosting this.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Bye.
Hey, this is Dr. Haider. Yeah, we've got two people controlling this system here. I gotta just give it up to Julia and not try to jump in there, turn things on and off. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Maybe you were just sitting around waiting for me to jump on. You got to let me know whether you guys find this kind of content interesting or useful or not. Does everyone who watches me just want to hear about medications and supplements, or is lifestyle something people find interesting? I mean, I know we do have lifestyle coaching clients, so Michelle is doing something, but I just want to kind of, maybe we need like a Q&A, or like a to put a question in the Facebook group and other places, how many people are interested in that kind of content. Anyway, I will jump into the questions and just go ahead and get started, and hopefully Julia will remind me if there's anything I need to talk about. All right, so I know Julia did tell me something. Yeah. So I'll start with that. So at this point, we have over 2,000 people registered for the Long COVID Reset Summit. Highly recommend everyone, if you're not registered, go and register at longcovidreset.com. We have amazing content. I mean, I think it's the best content anywhere in the world. I don't think has been any other summit, or whatever you want to call it, grouping of people with this much interesting content and cutting edge content, really. So Pierre Corey is going to go into detail about his kind of unique approach to long COVID, which has a lot of overlap with the FLCCC protocol and kind of the way that I do things as well. But he has his own kind of unique methodology, and he goes into a lot of detail about exactly his approach, how he treats long haulers when they walk into his clinic, at drpierrecorey.com. And Dr. Mubin has a fantastic talk. Dr. Yusuf JP Salibi, another FLCCC member, goes into a lot of detail of things that aren't on the FLCCC protocol, especially a lot of nutraceutical supplements that he uses in his practice, including things like, what are those proteins, little short proteins, I forget what they're called, peptides. So and also methylene blue and LDN, and really I think we cover all our bases, all the bases here at the summit. All the questions people have asked, therapies that they were interested in. We get information on all of them. And so one announcement. So some people have registered for the VIP passes, but we're also going to be giving away 100 free VIP passes. So there's going to be kind of like a raffle. You just have to register before Thursday the 17th in order to enter that. That kind of contest for the free giveaway of VIP passes, which again gives you access to all the live Q&As, and there's a lot of summit speakers who are going to show up live during the summit and be able to do a live Q&A. Some of them will not be able to be present live, but we will gather all the questions that people have during the summit and try to add a Q&A later. So we'll try to connect with the speakers later who aren't able to show up live, and then once we do get their Q&A kind of session recorded, we'll update the summit, and all the VIP members will get notified that the Q&A has been posted with those people. So one of the things that makes it different is that, for example, the FLCCC had a meeting about a month ago, a conference, their first conference actually. Most of the speakers only got 30 minutes to give their content, and Yusuf Salibi, who is at this online summit of ours, November 18th to 21st, he only made it halfway through his presentation, but we gave him like plenty of time. So people are talking for like, they're going to be talking for an hour and a half. Sometimes we're giving people 2 hours. Like in the case of Dr. Mubin, he's going to have over 2 hours just because he has so much stuff to cover. So we haven't limited speakers. Some speakers limited themselves to an hour. Other people went to an hour and a half, 2 hours. So really, there's a lot of content and it's really high quality. So I highly recommend everyone and spread the word. It took a lot of effort, a lot of people behind the scenes to set this up, and we'd really like it to be a spectacular success, hopefully, so that we can do more of these and continue to increase the quality of the content and the amount of content that we have, and just really make longcovidreset.com hopefully one of the go-to resources for all the cutting edge treatments and for long COVID and for vaccine injuries as well. All right, so without further ado, we will jump into the questions. So the name isn't here, but any supplements you can recommend in place of statins? I did just see this on the Facebook group, so the name is probably on the Facebook group. Let me just see if I can find it. Brandon. Yeah. So Brandon asks, any supplements you can recommend in place of statins? I have high CCL5 Rantes and SCD40L and respond well to Maravroc and statins, but can't seem to tolerate the statins anymore. When he's on them, anxiety, depression, irritability, and off of them feels much better. So what are the statins? What are we trying to do with the statins? We're not really trying to lower cholesterol so much as we're aiming for their benefits on vascular health. So omega-3 fatty acids, very important. That's EPA and DHA. So you can start off with omega-3 fish oils like Wiley's Finest. They have a bottled fish oil that has 2.3 grams of EPA and DHA within a teaspoon per teaspoon. So you can try taking, try at a lower dose and gradually increase it up to a teaspoon twice a day. So about 4 grams plus of omega-3 EPA, DHA, omega-3s per day. You may find even better results. I've heard from people like Pierre Corey and others that the prescription omega-3 EPA only oils like Vascepa is a EPA only, no DHA in it, may work even better for people. So there is that. Some people have reported that they work even better for long COVID. In terms of prescriptions, Dr. Bruce Patterson at Incel DX, he does, a lot of people are intolerant to statins. So you can try adding coenzyme Q10. If you're still intolerant, then you can try switching to fenofibrate. Oftentimes he'll add fenofibrate. That is, it was an older drug that was used for cholesterol lowering and also for its vascular benefits. And so fenofibrate, I know on the Facebook group somebody mentioned gemfibrozil. Fenofibrate has stronger effects than gemfibrozil, but if you can't tolerate fenofibrate, you can try a weaker version, which would be gemfibrozil. The other thing is that a lot of the vascular inflammation is related to microclotting. So the inflammation and the microclotting are kind of two sides of the same coin. The inflammation is causing more microclotting. The clotting is itself causing inflammation of the vascular wall and the vascular beds. So using nattokinase and serrapeptase to help break down the microclots would be beneficial. Anything that can bind to the spike protein in the vasculature would be helpful. So, ivermectin binds the spike protein, but other things will digest the spike protein. Nattokinase digests the spike protein, and bromelain also digests the spike protein. And then anything that inhibits platelets, so aspirin or Plavix, will also help with the inflammation and the vascular kind of inflammation and damage that's going on. So all of these things are going to be beneficial, as well as things that help to tame the sympathetic overactivity, which also helps to calm down inflammation. So that's the approach that I would take in general. But kind of the same answer I have all the time is just I prefer to cover all your bases. Other people do different things. They try one thing at a time. That's okay too. But I do think that probably the anticoagulation kind of approach. So nattokinase serrapeptase. Vitamin E is another important one. So alpha tocopherol version of vitamin E, also very good for vascular inflammation. Also very important. I think vitamin K2 is also important to make sure that calcium is not building up in the walls of your vasculature, which can also happen. So I mean, you can keep adding things, right, until you get to the entire protocol. So all the supplements and all the medications. But if you're trying to stay focused and try, kind of a focused approach, then I think this works well. What I've just said. Darren says, any thoughts on saline infusion helping with long COVID? So one of our summit participants has told me that some people have benefited tremendously from just going and getting salt water put into their IV. So yeah, so I have heard that helps a lot with long COVID. It's you can go to these infusion centers like where people get after a night out on the town, they go and get like an IV therapy, and you can just ask them to infuse IV, salt water, which is a bag of saline, and unfortunately, it costs like 150, $200. So it's as expensive as like a hyperbaric oxygen therapy in a lot of places. But you might be able to find a cheap way to do it. You might, if you know a nurse or somebody. I mean, you can get IV saline bags as long as you can put in an IV, even yourself. It's saline is not expensive. You can hang a bag of saline. What it makes me wonder is, can you just push fluids? Drink more water and feel better, possibly, right? So there's a lot of things that make people feel better, and a lot of them are placebo effects. So sticking an IV in your arm will have I think, a stronger, like an activated placebo effect versus doing like popping a sugar pill. But it depends on the person. So the more kind of the more elaborate, right, the placebo is, right? Like if you do placebo surgery, right, where you put the person under and you inject like a pain block and you like pretend to do a sham procedure on them, that's gonna, I think, have a stronger placebo effect than if you just pop a sugar pill. And just belief is also, I think, part of it. So maybe you don't call that placebo, but you call it like, just mind body connection and stuff like that. But whatever you can do of things that are harmless to begin with, as long as you don't have heart failure or diastolic heart dysfunction, for example, things, or like a kidney issue, edema. Some long haulers have some edema. I haven't seen a lot of it, but it is a symptom. So yeah. By the way, I will mention that Pierre Corey is going to be talking about a medication that I haven't heard from anyone else before for long haulers, and it's a really big part of his protocol. He's had tremendous success with it, and I'm just going to leave it a mystery for now. So if you want to hear about it, register for the summit, longcovidreset.com. Yeah, and I had never heard of this medication before. He's going to be discussing it during his presentation at the longcovidreset.com summit. And all right, so Kyle, and the reason I remembered it was because he's mentioned to me that there was a patient who had a lot of edema, which I haven't seen a lot of with long haulers, but one of the patients that had a tremendous, recovery because of this mystery medication had edema, and it helped them. Kyle Christian says, I've recently been prescribed several meds from your office for long COVID. Suddenly I'm feeling much better for a week or so after 2 years of long COVID. This is the longest good run I've had. Would you suggest still starting the meds? Meds are naltrexone, pravastatin, coenzyme Q10, or seeing if I continue to feel better before starting meds? Still have some anxiety and tinnitus. Can say the ice plunges are definitely helping the anxiety after 3 days in a row of it. So if you start the ice plunges, I would continue the ice plunges. I am such a big proponent of ice plunges at this point. I love ice plunges. I've gotten my whole family involved. I have a 3-year-old, a 7-year-old, 10-year-old. For the first couple of weeks, no one else wanted to jump in. And then one day the 7-year-old was like, I'm going in. He jumps in, and then the 10-year-old jumps in, and then the 3-year-old is now getting into it, and she even like sat down in this, like, I don't know. Today it was like 5 degrees Celsius, so not as cold as sometimes. I sometimes do 0 degrees Celsius, which is 32 Fahrenheit. But even she sat down for a few seconds before jumping out. Um, my wife went kind of halfway in today, so she's almost there. If you can't do the ice plunge, if you're just too afraid of it, or if you're finding it difficult, there is kind of like a limited ice plunge. You can just plunge your face in, okay? And this is what's called the dive reflex. I don't know the history of it, why it's called the dive reflex, but one of the vagal maneuvers is you hyperventilate, I'm not sure exactly how long. Maybe somebody can look it up. So you breathe in, breathe out really fast, right? And then hold your breath, and then stick your face into ice cold water. And that is a vagal maneuver which helps to bring down heart rate. Something that sometimes physicians tell people to do vagal maneuvers if they have tachycardia, especially like a sustained tachycardia. And it's very effective, actually, some of these vagal maneuvers. So one is a carotid sinus massage. You don't want to do it on both sides because you can pass out, but one side, maybe you massage the carotid sinus, which is in this area. Sometimes I've done that. I've experimented with that sometimes, and sometimes, I mean, it does really kind of like bring you down a bit, right? But sometimes it's almost too much. It's almost too strong. It's almost. But I actually never tried it during COVID. No, maybe I did. I don't remember anymore. I may have tried it during COVID. But yeah, sometimes it's a bit strong. So you got to experiment with different vagal maneuvers, and you know do them. Don't overdo them in the beginning. Just kind of like try them out and see. You don't want to like pass out or something. You don't do them while you're driving. Don't do them while you're operating heavy machinery. They can have a very powerful effect of calming down the nervous system. And if you find some you like, maybe try doing them 3 or 4 times a day to try to maintain this kind of even keel. But yeah, to get back to Kyle, your question, I would, if you're feeling better and you've added something new that seems to be helping a lot, I would give it a chance. Give it a chance to work. If you feel like you hit like a ceiling, or you only get to like 50 or 60 or 80% better, and there's still some more room to improve, after a couple of weeks, you feel like you've hit a peak and you're not improving anymore, then the naltrexone is really safe. A lot of people benefit from it. It's really low dose, right? And the pravastatin, coenzyme Q10, also very effective for a lot of people. But if you don't need them, you don't need them. And I think some people, just by retraining the nervous system with ice plunges, may be the thing that tips them over, into getting better, and kind of like just getting their body reset, and then dealing with the spike protein and clearing it out. Barbara says, I did one IV infusion and it cost $150, only lasted 24 hours. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, if an IV infusion works, it makes me wonder, like maybe just try drinking a lot of water, right? Like really a lot of water. And or maybe ORS, right? Maybe not just pure water, without any electrolytes. So oral rehydration solution, you can find simple over-the-counter recipes online. Although there is one thing that works well that you can buy. Although the way to, I mean, it's really easy to make ORS. It's just like salt and sugar and like diluted orange juice, and I think either baking powder or baking soda, one of them. Um, and you mix those up, and you have ORS. There's varying recipes. Some of them have lemon juice in them, and some of them have orange juice. But maybe just pushing fluids. Maybe it's just like you don't have enough fluid. But maybe it's just like a secondary benefit, right? Maybe it's just increasing vascular volume or something, um, and you would expect that you would pee it out pretty quickly, right? So I don't know if it's going to give anyone sustained, lasting benefit. Although I did hear positive things. So one of the summit speakers discusses it briefly. Thomas says, I've read that fasting for women in perimenopause can backfire, as you might go too long without proteins, which might put too much stress on the adrenals or thyroid. What are your thoughts? I see the benefit of fasting for autophagy to help with long COVID, but does it run the risk of hurting women's health in other ways? Yeah, so Michelle has spoken about this a bit, and I think she would be the right person to ask this question to. So me and Michelle are going to be having a live stream on Thursday, and we can put this question to Michelle. So Julia, if you can save this one for Michelle. I do think that anything that you try for long COVID, if it really doesn't work well for you and you're sure that it's not a Herxheimer reaction that's happening, then it may just not be the right time in your life, or it may be that for some other reason, you have a specific adrenal issue, and you can't fast. You need to eat more frequently. Although one of the summit speakers actually speaks on this topic, where specifically, women with this kind of like adrenal fatigue situation have usually been told not to fast. They've been told to eat like every 3 hours or something, eat very frequently. And in her experience, fasting and ketosis have actually been beneficial, have actually helped to reverse their problems, and heal them metabolically, and help them get over their issues. So I know it's some people consider it risky or dangerous, or kind of like counter not beneficial, counterproductive. But for a lot of these people, it may be a matter of kind of similar to a Herxheimer reaction, where you go through a phase of like resetting your metabolism and healing your metabolism, and you may feel worse before you feel better. But if it doesn't work for you, then it doesn't work for you. But then also it's a little bit complicated, because maybe it feels like it's really bad and it's not working for you, but it actually is benefiting you, and you're just going through this phase of kind of like a die-off or a release of toxins or something, or a healing phase where your metabolism has to reset. But yeah, if fasting really doesn't work for certain people in certain situations, then they can consider other things like ketosis, ketogenic diet. One of our summit speakers is talking about ketosis and ketogenic diet, or just taking ketones, so ketone esters. Maybe you can get some of the benefits of ketosis. So ketosis can help put you into autophagy as well, and there's a lot of supplements that can put you into autophagy, and medications. Ivermectin helps you get into autophagy. Various herbs help you get in. Resveratrol, spermidine are the two most famous ones that the FLCCC has specifically recommended. But a lot of other herbs also trigger autophagy. Curcumin does it, dandelion does it, blackseed does it, and a lot of others help to get you into autophagy. And so I wouldn't write it off right away for people who've been historically told that fasting is bad for them. I don't think fasting is. I don't think that fasting is bad for most people, even people who think that it might be bad for them. But it's a matter of dose and timing and how long you do it for. So certainly some people may not be able to do it as much as others can. You do have to be a little bit more careful in some people, who, for example, get hypoglycemic or something. So for some people, you're going to have to be a little bit more careful than others. Kathy says, as far as statins, are they good or bad for long COVID symptoms like the sympathetic ones? And doesn't matter which ones. I was on rosuvastatin before COVID. I know Patterson recommends them if indicated from his tests. I had switched to Crestor because of its advantages related to Alzheimer's risk, etc. So they are beneficial for a lot of people, as I said earlier at the beginning of this Q&A, that we're specifically looking for their vascular anti-inflammatory benefits, and they do have those for the vasculature. I do recommend taking coenzyme Q10 with them. I don't love statins for long-term use, because there is an elevated risk of diabetes, about 2% the last I checked. And so it's almost like, maybe there's some benefit for, Alzheimer's disease or, cardiovascular disease or whatever, but at the same time, all of that benefit could be completely counteracted by the risk of diabetes. If you were to develop that would be extremely negative, right, for Alzheimer's and for cardiovascular health. So overall, I think statins are a very mixed bag. I don't really like statins. I never was really a big fan of them. I didn't, especially for women. The benefits are even less than they are for men, and especially for people who've never had heart disease. So what is it? The number needed to treat.com is a great resource. I think it's the nnt.com probably, where you can look up some of the research on statins. Yeah, THENNT.com. Take a look at that if you're on a statin or thinking of taking one, long term at least. So short term, that's how I see most of these treatments for COVID as short term, possibly necessary things to do short term, and then try to get off of them. Tracy, can I still take long COVID medicine, although I feel I developed heart palpitations after COVID? I know some are hard on the heart. Yeah, I wouldn't say, other than maybe Mravroc, possibly, if you're on Mravroc for a long time, certainly can cause some issues for the heart in HIV patients who have been followed for years on Mravroc. I wouldn't say any others are necessarily hard on the heart. Ivermectin is super benign. It's definitely not hard on the heart. Fluvoxamine has no effect, as far as I know, on the heart. Low-dose naltrexone also really no effect. Pravastatin probably beneficial if you have long COVID inflammation. So I'm not sure I understand the question. Can I still take long COVID medicine, although I feel I developed heart palpitations after COVID? Oh, I see. I do get the question. Yes, because you think that some of them are hard on the heart. Yeah. I don't think there's any contraindication. Heart palpitations are very common. It's probably a sympathetic nervous system mediated issue, not so much a heart problem as like the nervous system activity impinging on the way the heart works. So the heart has a nervous system, and it has so the sympathetic nervous system connects with the heart, and maybe what's triggering the heart palpitations. The other thing that could be a cause of heart palpitations were if you had scarring. So if there was heart damage. I haven't really heard of it with COVID, but certainly with vaccines, there is a significant amount of heart damage. At the Long COVID Reset Summit, there's going to be a great talk by um, Peter McCullough, who's a very prominent cardiologist. Has published like 600 plus studies, and 60 of them on COVID specifically. So he's going to go into some detail on heart ramifications, the ramifications on the cardiovascular system of COVID and vaccines, and he really thinks that the vaccines are far worse. But yeah, some people develop scarring after myopericarditis episode, and it could happen in a long hauler, but it's far more likely in somebody who's been vaccinated. The scarring can lead to conduction abnormalities, so the electrical kind of impulses that are going through the heart triggering the heartbeat can be blocked by the scar. You can have reentrant tachycardias. You can have all kinds of things. You can have sudden death also because of the scarring. There is evidence from before COVID and before the pandemic that's in some cases the heart scarring can kind of remodel. You can have some resolution of some of the scarring, but in the vaxxed population especially, he's going to talk about how it's really a big problem, and a significant percentage of the heart muscle may be scarred in a lot of people who have been vaccinated. But yeah, I mean, the only one I might be a little concerned about would be hydroxychloroquine with long-term use. Short-term use for a few months, not really a big concern related to the heart. And what else? Statins, no concern. Yeah, I don't see any concerns with long COVID medication for the heart, especially for 3 to 5 months, 6 months. With long-term use of hydroxychloroquine, you would need to do monitoring for a lot of things. You need to monitor like eye exams, EKGs, blood tests, all kinds of things with very long-term use. Not very long-term, but ongoing chronic use if you decide to do that. It is a very safe medication, but just to be, on the safe side and prudent, you should do all the recommended monitoring. Louise says, if I try nicotine vaping for brain fog, when should I stop if I do not see results? For a few reasons, I'd rather vape it than do gum. So I think most people, when something's really going to work, it works within 1 to 2 weeks. So I would give it a try for a couple of weeks and then consider stopping it then. With nicotine, I mean, the word on the street is that when it works really fast, and it's like the same day or the next day, or within a couple of days, you see the benefit of it. And I haven't heard of anyone trying, continuing for months or weeks and weeks at a time, and then finally it kicks in and they see benefits. So nicotine, there's some addictive potential, and it also kind of ramps up the sympathetic nervous system in some ways. So if it's not working, I wouldn't want you to continue it. Kyle says all good lifestyle changes are good to hear too. Okay, great. In reply to my initial question to everyone, yeah. Honestly, like some people I found, even people who've come to me and had a one-on-one consult. Some of them are a lot like me, where it's like I really hesitate to take medications. I'm far less hesitant to take things like nattokinase, serrapeptase, over-the-counter supplements. I'm far more willing to try them. They just seem, far more gentle and, moderate compared to prescription drugs, which often have significant side effects because they kind of push things so strongly. So yeah, I guess that's good to hear. And I know lifestyle changes have have been hugely beneficial for myself and for a lot of people that I've spoken with. And I think it's just a matter of people believing it. You can usually fix things with lifestyle and maybe a few targeted supplements. And it's far safer than going down the prescription drug path. But at the same time, I'll temper that with some of the urgency that's been injected into my approach to long COVID since talking to all the physicians who are looking at the microclotting. So in the U.S., we don't have a lot of access to these kind of like live blood analyses, which can show us the microclotting definitively. And so there's just there's no perfect test for microclotting unless you can do that live blood analysis, unless you can put the slide of the blood under the microscope with the proper stain and visualize the microclots. Otherwise, you're left doing things like alpha-2 antiplasmin, von Willebrand factor, and it's not always positive. So if we take them at their word, they have said that everyone they've tested, and everyone who had the clinical diagnosis of long COVID did have microclots. It's like a 1-to-1 correlation. So anyway, the reason I'm talking about this is because they have told me that in their experience, the longer you go without treating the microclots, the harder they are to treat. And some people may develop irreversible damage if the microclotting gets too bad and blocks off oxygen delivery to peripheral tissues. Some tissues may die, and it may be very difficult to bring those back if the damage goes too far. So I would start the anti-clotting kind of approach very early, and I'm actually considering getting some nattokinase serrapeptase and experimenting with it myself. Although at this point, like I've said before, from the cold plunges, I don't have symptoms anymore, but I may go and get the alpha-2 antiplasmin and the von Willebrand factor test, and certainly if those are positive, I would start taking nattokinase serrapeptase until those went back to normal. And maybe I'll be able to find somebody who can do live blood analysis on me to check for microclotting. But yeah, if you can check with sometimes naturopaths and functional medicine doctors. Some of these people who have on the ground clinics have access to that kind of blood analysis, and they can do those kind of tests to look for microclots. Kathy says, I'm considering starting VenoFlow from Life Extension, which has pycnogenol and nattokinase because of my severe tinnitus and pulsatile tinnitus. Would that be safe with other meds like metoprolol for SVT and hypertension? I see no contraindication to taking pycnogenol. I don't actually know much about pycnogenol, but yeah, we can look it up. Dr. Laura, if you're watching, please run a analysis of pycnogenol, nattokinase, and metoprolol. But yeah, we can. If she's not here, we can look it up and get back to you. There's limited analytical capability for cross reactions between herbs, supplements, and medications. But if it's in the database and there is anything that we know about it, we'll let you know. But off the top of my head, I don't think that there would be any issue in taking those supplements with metoprolol. For SVT and hypertension is what you're on metoprolol for. So hypertension is oftentimes, it's probably possible to get you off of metoprolol. Hypertension can often be treated with lifestyle changes and supplements and things like that. But the SVT might be a bit of a harder nut to crack, although that may also be amenable to, treatment without metoprolol. But I understand you're on metoprolol. It's been prescribed. I'm not going to tell you to stop it, certainly. And I don't think there would be any issue taking supplements, but always best to ask the person who prescribed it. But we will run an interaction check and see if there is anything in the database for pycnogenol nattokinase, if they're even in the database. So what are NSAID alternatives to take for muscular pain if I get on an SSRI, since they are not recommended to take together? So you could, curcumin is great. As I've said before, what I've seen work really well is topical turmeric with castor oil. So you mix them together and apply them, and if you heat it up, it can improve absorption even more. Very messy though, but works really well. And then oral turmeric or curcumin, especially with some black pepper extract, can work really well for muscle pain. Yeah, those are the main ones that I would consider. The other thing, maybe like hot cold therapy, ice bath / sauna, that kind of stuff. And if you haven't tried it before, then deep tissue massage, or like having somebody actually walk on the muscle, putting a lot, as much weight as you can tolerate on it without breaking the limb, can be very beneficial for some of the deeper muscle pain that seems like it's just not going away. That plus stretching sometimes, but just like getting in there and moving stuff around, moving the blood around, moving tissues around. But yeah, I would, if it's long COVID and it's muscle pain, then I would look into the blood thinners and stuff like nattokinase serrapeptase. Maybe it's just a matter of and maybe like you need to like do some squats or something if you have like muscle pain, or lift something heavy. Just get the blood flowing, get the blood going in there without raising the heart rate above zone 2. Sometimes that helps with the muscle ache. So there's a lot of things that can be tried, and it kind of depends on all the specific details of this, but those are some things I would look into. Heat, maybe heat alternating with cold, and maybe it could just be targeted topical heat and cold instead of like an ice plunge or a sauna, but targeted topical heat, hot and cold, like hot pack, ice pack, um, which all just alternating the things help stimulate blood flow and help get things moving. So when blood flow is stimulated and lymphatic flow is stimulated, you're bringing stuff in that needs to be there, and you're taking stuff out that needs to leave. And sometimes the muscles are hurting because stuff just has gotten kind of clogged up in there and hasn't left, stuff that needs to be taken out. And so exercise can get things moving, but also hot and cold can get things moving, and blood thinners may be what's needed to get things moving in some cases. And also, you might look into near infrared topical light therapy, which has also been shown to be very beneficial. Louis says baby aspirin is recommended daily for how long? So, you know, essentially, I recommend people take things until they're like 90% or 100% better for about a month at least before they try to taper off of them. So, unless you have something like a positive, microclotting test, and then you can take it until the microclots are gone, or you have positive von Willebrand factor or alpha-2 antiplasmin, in which case take it until those normalize, and you've also gone for a month with like no symptoms, and then as you taper off, the symptoms don't come back. So if you taper off and the symptoms come back, you taper back up and or increase again, not taper, reverse taper. Barbara says, can I use nattokinase and serrapeptase having an ulcer and gastritis? Yeah, so that would be risky, certainly. You should probably heal the gastritis before you start taking nattokinase and serrapeptase. You know, you if you have an active ulcer and it's kind of like clotted off and not bleeding, um, if you take something that breaks up clots, if there's a clot there, it'll break it, it'll digest it, and then the ulcer starts bleeding again. You're probably not in that situation. I mean, if the ulcer has stopped bleeding and it's been a few weeks, there's probably not like an actual scab still there. It started to heal, but if it gets rubbed the wrong way, if the gastritis worsens a bit, it might start bleeding again, and then it'll be harder to clot it off if you're on nattokinase serrapeptase. So I would want to heal the ulcer first and heal the gastritis, and that's kind of the first thing that you probably need to do. So chriskresser.com, you can find a lot of free, he has some free ebooks on reflux, gastritis, stomach issues, and it's usually diet and maybe sympathetic nervous system related too, but a lot of it has to do with diet and eating things that are triggering. So yeah, that's what I would look into first, healing that. Olga says, how can some sensitive people avoid side effects from ivermectin or other drugs? And if you really had to do the nattokinase serrapeptase with a recent ulcer or gastritis, you would want to be closely monitored by a physician and taking CBCs, to make sure, because you can start bleeding. You can have occult bleeding, which is invisible bleeding essentially into your stools, and your blood counts can drop a lot from this invisible bleeding into your stool. Small amounts of blood mixing with your stool, and you can't really tell that there's blood there. So if somebody had to take, blood thinners or something, and they had a bleeding risk like an ulcer, they would need to be closely monitored. Olga says, how can some sensitive people avoid side effects from ivermectin or other drugs? Yeah, so you just start low and go slow, basically. So, or you just put up with the side effect. Maybe it's a Herxheimer reaction, or maybe you're just like hypersensitive. The other thing that some people have found beneficial is nervous system retraining. The people who are hypersensitive. So one of the ones, retrainingthebrain.com, is one of those where you can get access to a nervous system retraining protocol. And that may help with the sensitivity to medications. But the basic thing is just start at a much lower dose where you don't have an effect, and then very, very slowly increase the dose. So you may need to get it compounded or something at a lower dose, or you might need to split open capsules or break apart pills into tiny micro doses and start off at a micro dose and then gradually work up. I mean, so Dr. Sleeby talks about microdosing naltrexone. So like not just low dose naltrexone, but like ultra low dose naltrexone, and like what's the other one, like super ultra low dose, I don't remember the terminology, but like very 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 low dose, microscopic doses. He characterizes them as almost homeopathic doses of naltrexone. So yeah, that's what you do. You start off with a homeopathic or near homeopathic dose of something that you're sensitive to, and work your way up very very slowly. um, Sarah says, and at the same time, work on your sympathetic nervous system, because a lot of it is this sympathetic nervous system mediated effects. So retraining the brain works on the sympathetic nervous system as well. So that might be one approach, if you can't do a cold plunge or something like that, or like a vagal nerve stimulator. Sarah says, I've heard serrapeptase is not recommended after hernia mesh surgery as it breaks up the mesh. Is this true? Would like to use it, but worried about messing that up. Yeah, that sounds like that would be a problem. Yeah. Yeah, it's possible. I don't know anything specifically about this, but it sounds plausible that enzyme therapies like serrapeptase might break up anything that's been. They can break up a lot of things. So if the thing that's in your body is susceptible to being enzymatically broken down by serrapeptase, then certainly that sounds like a big problem or a possible problem. Yeah, so we'll have to look into this a little bit more, but it sounds like it could be a serious issue for somebody. And depending on how bad the long haul is, it might be like a risk somebody's willing to take. It might be, you know, they might have to redo the surgery, but if it heals their long haul, it might be worth it. I don't know. So Dr. Laura, if we can set this aside and try to look it up a little bit, do a little bit more research on it, that would be great. All right, so I think we've reached the end here of the questions. So that means I'm off. I'm done. And again, I just want to remind everyone: register before the 17th in order to enter the raffle, I guess we're going to call it, or whatever, the contest for the 100 free VIP passes. We'll just randomly. Give them away to anyone who's signed up before the 17th who has not already paid for a VIP pass. But highly recommend, paying for the VIP pass if you can afford it, just to help us, with just support our efforts here, because we are really trying to heal the world of long COVID and vaccine injuries. And it's a tough road. We've spent a lot of time, a lot of resources setting up the Long COVID Summit. I had no idea it would take this much time and effort to set it up. But I think that we succeeded in creating the best summit, and I just want to make sure that it gets out to as many people as possible. So try to send it out to your social channels, email, blast it out to everyone in your address book, and tell people to come and register and sign up and learn about long COVID and learn about all the treatments that we have, and the the cutting edge things that can be done, for people who aren't getting better. And we need to light a fire under some of these medical physicians out in the community. And the only way to do that is to spread the word to as many patients as possible who don't know about long COVID and vaccine injuries, and if they do know about it, they don't realize it's treatable. So I think the biggest burden of disease is amongst vaccinated people, because they went into it, most of them at least, who weren't held over a barrel and forced to be vaccinated because they were going to lose their job. A lot of them went into it thinking the vaccines were the best thing since sliced bread, and they have blinders on to the vaccine injuries. And somehow we got to just break through the censorship. We got to spread the word. So again, whatever you guys can do to help us there, please do so. Part of that is just spreading the word. Go on to other sites, go on to other groups, go online and just sprinkle the information out there. Put the Long COVID Reset link up, in any groups or any places that you think might benefit from seeing that. All right. If that is the last question, I'm going to wrap it up. So Julia, if there's one more question, I'll take it. But if not, thank you everyone for watching. Thanks for all your support. We love you guys, and hope that we're benefiting you. Let us know if there's anything else we can do to help you. All right. Have a good one.